Instead, a humble king, a king that would come riding on the colt, a king that would bring the kingdom of God. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in to our Easter series. And this year we'll be following Jesus' final week of his life from his crucifixion as he comes up from the tomb. And in the midst of such uncertainty in the world right now, I think it's really important to look at the certain hope and victory that we have in Jesus. So our second reading in the series is taken from John 11 verses 45 to 53 and John 12 verses 10 to 19, if you follow along with me. As Jesus ate with Lazarus, Mary, Martha and his disciples, the Jews of the village weren't the only ones interested in what was going on. The chief priests, the religious leaders, were also keeping an eye on events. They had recently met together to discuss the threat Jesus posed to them, because many of the Jews who had seen what Jesus did for Lazarus believed in him. One of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "It is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish." So from that day on, they plotted to take Jesus' life. But on that Friday night, as they considered the events in Bethany, the religious leaders realised that they had an additional problem: Lazarus. He was the walking, talking evidence of Jesus' power. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the capital, to Jerusalem, which was also known as Zion, to celebrate the Passover, heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to him, shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey, a colt, and sat upon it, as it is written in the Jews' holy writings, the scriptures, "Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified, after the events of the next week had passed, did they realise that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees, a particular group of religious leaders, said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." So yeah guys, this passage clearly depicts Jesus as king, not a political and militaristic king that the Jews expected, one that they believed would liberate them from Roman occupation, but instead a humble king, a king riding on a colt, a king that would come to bring the kingdom of God, and that all who would choose to follow him would bow down and acknowledge that he is Lord. What also stood out to me in the passage was the Jews' response to hearing about Jesus. It says in the passage that they went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." In that moment, they are purposely going out to worship Jesus in the midst of a Jewish festival that had been celebrated for centuries. Although in less than a week's time, they'd be shouting, "Crucify him," in that moment of faith, where they dropped everything and went out to follow Jesus, that's an example to us today. Over the next week, I'd like us to think of any false kings or any idols in our lives that take away the time that we could be spending with God. So yeah, that was my personal takeaway. I'd really encourage you guys to read the passage again. The verses are John 11 verses 45 to 53 and John 12 10 to 19. And I'd also really like to encourage you to use the Swedish Bible study method. If you remember it, we've used it in Clay a couple of times. So you read the passage, I'd read it twice, reflect on it, and as you go through it, if you can, I'd highlight it. So maybe draw beside it a light bulb, something that stood out, a question mark, something that you don't quite understand, and an arrow, something that you could personally apply to your life. So yeah, that's all from me guys. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully I'll be seeing you soon.